Hi, I'm Yaakov and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Today we're talking about Jordan, the country to Israel's east. It's one that rarely dominates the headlines in the country, yet it touches nearly every core strategic interest that the Jewish state has. Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the West Bank, the future of Gaza, and of course the quiet day-to-day security coordination between Israeli security services and their Jordanian counterparts that prevent wars and terror attacks along the border. And at the center of it all is King Abdullah, a ruler who has stayed in power now for just over 25 years by balancing two worlds: deep strategic cooperation with Israel and Washington, while governing a public that is majority Palestinian and overwhelmingly suspicious of both America and Israel. For Israel, the relationship with Jordan, as we're about to hear, is not symbolic. It is essential. It's our quietest border, it's our buffer to the east, and it is the Hashemite custodianship over Al-Aqsa on the Temple Mount, probably the most sensitive flashpoint here in the Middle East. To help us understand who King Abdullah is, not just how he is perceived in Israel, but rather who the man is and what he believes, I'm joined by Aaron Magid, author of the new biography, The Most American King, Abdullah of Jordan. Aaron previously lived and reported in Amman. His work on Jordan has appeared in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, Al Monitor, the Middle East Institute, and the Atlantic Council. And he also hosts the podcast called On Jordan. He has a master's degree from Harvard University in Middle Eastern Studies. And in our conversation, we look at how Abdullah actually views Israel and the Israelis, what he really says behind closed doors, whether the Temple Mount file stabilizes the region, or maybe it fuels it, why security coordination is so important, and what really are King Abdullah's feelings towards Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a conversation about strategy, identity, and the quiet architecture of regional survival. Here we go. Aaron Magid, it's great to have you on the JPPI podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking because you actually wrote a book, came out a few months ago, called The Most American King, Abdullah of Jordan. So this is about King Abdullah. Book is out, Universal Publishers, came out in June. I've had the opportunity to read a number of sections of the book, and I found it to be extremely interesting and really gives a lot of insight into Israel's neighbor and a country that neighbors where I live. So I'm in Jerusalem, not too far from Amman for that matter. But a country that really plays a very important and I would say integral role all throughout Israeli history, but definitely in the last 2 years of the war that Israel has been waging and trying to fight against Hamas as well as other enemies in Iran. And of course, Jordan did play a role in that, and we're going to get to that in a bit. But King Abdullah is a figure who really has great significance and relevance and importance definitely to the average Israeli. I think we might not recognize sometimes the importance and the security interests that Israel has in Jordan. And we'll talk a bit about that as well, because there's obviously the political level and the security level of how these relations express themselves and illustrate in real life. But first, I want to ask you a very basic question, and that is, what makes Abdullah of Jordan the most American king? And I'm guessing in that title, it's not the most American king of Jordan, it's the most American king of all. So explain to us how he is such an American.
Sure. So King Abdullah, I argue in the book, is the most American king throughout the Arab world. You won't find any other Arab leader with as strong both personal and political ties with the United States as King Abdullah. So he went to middle school and high school in Massachusetts. He was on the wrestling team, and he went by the name Ab, not Abdullah, because he wanted to fit in with the other guys. When his father actually wanted to do Arabic lessons in high school, he would hide in the closet because he wanted to just be a regular American. Later, he went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and so much enjoyed that experience. He ended up sending his own children to the prestigious Jesuit University. He trained with the U.S. military in Kentucky. He went on his honeymoon in Hawaii and New York. And when he became king in 1999, because of the amount of time he spent in the United States and the United Kingdom, he actually spoke better English than Arabic. Even after he became king, he ended up continuing to own property in the DC area and in California. So it's really remarkable, the personal relations. But it's not just personal, as I mentioned, it's also political. So King Abdullah was the first Arab leader to meet in the White House with both President Trump, President Biden, and President Obama. Thousands of U.S. troops have been deployed to Jordan under both Democratic and Republican administrations. Jordan was the first Arab country to have a free trade agreement with the United States during the Bush administration. King Abdullah was the first Arab leader to address a joint House of Congress, also during the Bush administration. So time and time after again, Jordan has, under King Abdullah's leadership, maintained very close relations with the United States. Now, some people argue that, Saudi Arabia or Qatar also have close relations with the United States right now. But what makes Jordan unique is how bipartisan it is across multiple decades. So, for example, yes, Saudi Arabia has very good ties with the Trump administration, but if we remember during the previous administration with President Biden, Saudi Arabia was considered a pariah because of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And with Qatar, there are good relations right now, but in 2017, during President Trump's first term, he actually called for an embargo against Qatar because he said they supported terrorism. So King Abdullah has placed himself under Democrats and Republicans in a very strong spot, and that has ensured that Jordan has continued to receive about $1.5 billion in annual U.S. aid.
But I mean, isn't that the answer? That the reason he has worked so hard to cultivate and maintain these bipartisan relations and these close ties with the United States is because of how dependent Jordan is on the United States. Like, unlike Saudi or unlike Qatar or some other countries here in the Gulf, the Jordanians don't really have resources. They don't have money. They don't have, they have a military. They have strong security services. That has to be said. But they are they're heavily reliant on the United States and to some extent also on Israeli security coordination, and we'll talk maybe in a bit about the whole water deal between Israel and Jordan. But I'm curious, like, is it not just out of self-interest, less out of an ideology?
Well, I think it's both. You're correct in that you sense that Jordan does rely a lot on the United States. First of all, its finances, the $1.5 billion, one of the highest amounts the United States gives to any Arab country. It's also military hardware. The CIA also trains Jordan's intelligence, the GID. So the relations from Jordan with the U.S. are very good, and because King Abdullah needs that relationship. He doesn't have the option because of oil like Saudi Arabia or Qatar to be able to be more independent from the United States. I would say at the same time that his personality does drive it, because in Jordan's previous leadership under King Hussein, there were more rifts between the two countries. One example would be during the first Gulf War, where King Hussein strongly criticized the U.S. invasion, and that caused a decrease of U.S. aid to Jordan. King Abdullah wanted to avoid that mistake in 2003 when the Bush administration launched its invasion of Iraq. And what it did is Jordan worked quietly under King Abdullah's leadership to continue having U.S. troops in the country, have overflight rights from Jordan into Iraq, intelligence gathering missions, and that caused U.S. aid to increase after the 2003 invasion. So I would say yes, partly it's due to national self-interest, but partly it's due to King Abdullah's own personality, his own background, the fact that he spends so much time in the United States, and he just relates much better to congressional lawmakers.
His father also had very close relations with the United States, right? The late King Hussein, he was treated when he was sick with cancer in the 1990s, and I think he was there for a number of medical treatments and stints in the United States. We know that he had very close relations with Bill Clinton, and of course there's all these, we're now talking just a few days after the 30th memorial of Yitzhak Rabin. There were very close ties between King Hussein and Yitzhak Rabin, and of course Bill Clinton at the time. But I'm curious about King Abdullah. He wasn't always the shoe-in heir to his father. There was, for a period of time, his uncle, the brother of King Hussein, Hassan, who was the crown prince and was believed to be the apparent heir. And for a period of time, if I'm not mistaken, King Abdullah thought that he was actually going to spend the rest of his days in the military. He wasn't necessarily going to make it into to becoming the king. And King Abdullah changed his mind, what was it, just a few months before passing away, and appointed his son, his eldest son, it has to be said. Explain to us what happened there. Why did that change take place?
So when King Abdullah was born in the early 1960s, he was actually the crown prince for 3 years. And as you can imagine, Jordan was a very weak state at the time, so to have a toddler be the second in command, the equivalent of the vice president of the United States, was kind of a crazy idea. So in 1965, they shifted the crown prince away from King Abdullah to King Hussein's brother, Prince Hassan. And Prince Hassan, he was the deputy for over 3 decades, for over 30 years. So a very long time. He was the one meeting with the senior officials. He was the one, when the King Hussein was away, was in charge of the country. So he had a very significant role. And therefore, everyone assumed that because he had been crown prince for so many years, that he would also become king. When King Hussein got sick, and as you mentioned, he spent a lot of time in the United States, in Minnesota, getting treatment. That's when there was that shift in late 1998 from the crown prince to King Abdullah. Part of the reason, according to King Hussein, who wrote a letter revealing why he did it, he was upset that the crown prince was intervening in military matters, appointing and dismissing various officers, and King Hussein didn't appreciate the crown prince doing that, especially when he was sick. But also, there was talk that King Abdullah, because of the time he spent in the military, Prince Hassan didn't spend any time in the military. King Abdullah spent over 15 years in Jordan's military in the Special Forces unit. He had a better connection with the security forces, and he was considered younger, more charismatic, and he would be the better leader in the future. So King Hussein, from his deathbed, switched the leadership, and it shocked many, not just in Jordan, but across the world. King Abdullah hadn't given any public speeches before that. And as you cited, people thought he was just going to continue his very successful career in the military. But King Hussein had a shift as he was about to die, and he changed the leadership, and then King Abdullah came into power in 1999, and the rest is history.
How did Prince Hassan take to this when it did happen? Back then in the late 90s, before King Hussein died? Did that, I'm assuming, and I'm guessing that must have caused some great tension within the kingdom, and definitely between the new king and his uncle, who had served in the role for a very long time.
Correct. So there was definitely some disappointment, frustration from the crown prince, because he had been hoping to be promoted to king. And when King Abdullah came into power in 1999, he didn't have the crown prince continue with that role. He appointed instead Prince Hamza to be the crown prince for 5 years, from 1999 until 2004. And then there ended up being problems with Prince Hamza, which we can talk about later, in 2021 with the whole sedition affair. But King Abdullah wanted to turn a new chapter on Jordan's history and wanted to be the one in control, and therefore he didn't have Prince Hassan continue as crown prince. He had Prince Hassan continue in more of a scientific and advisory role. He maintained some interfaith programs, and he still has a position in Jordan, but he's not the one calling the shots. Because King Abdullah really wanted to assert himself in 1999, because he was relatively young. He was in his mid-30s, and he didn't want someone who was much older than him being his deputy.
And you mentioned Prince Hamza, his half-brother, the son of King Hussein and Queen Noor, who was the American-born Jordanian wife of the king. And there was, he experienced a real earthquake to some extent within the kingdom when his brother allegedly tried to overthrow him in something of a coup, and then he placed him under house arrest.
Correct. So Prince Hamza is actually still under house arrest. It was a huge affair in the kingdom, because generally the royal family is united behind the leader. And this was a time where not only the accusation that he tried to unseat him, but years before there was criticism more and more on Twitter, on social media, from Prince Hamza. He didn't directly criticize the king often in those tweets, but it was more corruption in the system, criticism of, there was a tax law in 2018 that was quite unpopular. So Prince Hamza had built up more and more discomfort with the Jordanian system, and he partnered with Bassam Awadallah, according to the Jordanian government accusations. Bassam Awadallah was a Jordanian, both of Palestinian background, but also had U.S. citizenship. And at the same time, he was a senior advisor to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So he had kind of a foot in a lot of different arenas.
In Saudi Arabia.
In Saudi Arabia, exactly. And Bassem al-Abdallah was sentenced to jail, and he's still right now in jail despite efforts by the State Department to release him because he's technically a U.S. citizen. But there was efforts by him with Bassem al-Abdallah to reportedly unseat King Abdullah, but I would just emphasize how little chance it's had to succeed because there wasn't a single senior member of Jordan's military or intelligence services who was arrested in this affair. And in order to unseat the king, you'd need a substantial portion, both of the military and the intelligence services, which are quite popular and powerful in Jordan, the GID, to participate in that. So this was really a failed attempt, but it did hurt the country's image as an island of stability.
And it's it's quite the story. I mean, whenever you look at, I guess anyone here who's ever watched The Crown, let's say on Netflix, and not to make comparisons, but just looking at what's happening in the UK, where King Charles just recently revoked the title from his brother, no longer Prince Andrew. There's always intrigue in the royal court, as we know, and even the Emir of Qatar, I think, kicked out his father at some point to be able to take over. So, getting back though to King Abdullah, I mean, he comes into office, right? He rises, he ascends as king just before the Second Intifada breaks out here in Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu is not the prime minister, but Benjamin Netanyahu does return a number of years later as prime minister in 2009. And initially, and you quote Martin Indyk, the late ambassador to Israel from the United States, who said that in the beginning, when Netanyahu returns to his office, King Abdullah actually says, "Listen, I get along with this guy. Things are going to go okay." Well, we all know it's not a secret that there is great tension and not a lot of affection between these two men. I don't know how much they even talk. I don't know if they talk at all. King Abdullah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's ever been here. I don't think he's ever visited the state of Israel.
He did visit early in his tenure.
He did. Okay, so he visited early in his tenure. But I mean, what is the situation? Why is there such tension between Israel and Jordan today? Why can't we get along? We have peace, right? We've had peace now for, what is it? Almost 30 years, 31, 32 years now. I mean, why can't these countries get along knowing that they have joint enemies? They have great challenges together. The security services, and maybe you could speak to this also, Aaron, the security services do get along. There's very good ties between Israel Shin Bet and the Mukhabarat, the Jordanian security services. It would make sense that they would get along. Why don't we?
So there was a honeymoon period when King Abdullah took power in 1999 where the relations really were much better than they were today. So I'll give you some examples. First of all, King Abdullah, in one of his most significant acts in 1999, is he kicked out senior Hamas officials from the country. King Hussein, even though he had the peace treaty, he wanted to keep some Hamas officials in the country in order to win favor from his domestic population. But King Abdullah said that he didn't want that, and he accused Hamas of engaging in terrorism. So that was number one. Number two is King Abdullah praised Israel's withdrawal in 2000 from South Lebanon and said the Jewish state had gained the moral high ground. Comments you'd never hear from King Abdullah today, praising Israel's ethics. And finally, he was even asked by CNN if one of his children would marry an Israeli citizen, and he said that's certainly a possibility. Once again, comments that would be really striking. You'd never hear from a Jordanian leader today. So the relations were quite good in the beginning. I would say they went downhill during the start of the Second Intifada as the Palestinian death toll climbed, as the peace process seemed to not be going anywhere. There was more criticism from King Abdullah against Israel, the prime minister, and Israel's security forces. I would say that King Abdullah wanted to give Prime Minister Netanyahu somewhat of a chance, and that's when you quoted Martin Indyk's statements during the beginning of his tenure, but then it really went off track as Netanyahu's term continued pretty significantly. So there were quite a few events that caused the ties to go down on both sides. So from Israel's perspective, there was two pieces of land that Israel had controlled for many years, and then both in northern Israel and southern Israel on the border with Jordan. And then Jordan demanded that land be returned, and there were many Israelis who were opposed to that. There were incidents at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, specifically after 2 police officers were killed on the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque area. And then afterwards, Israel wanted to increase the security measures around that. And then Jordanians and many Palestinians opposed it, and it caused a lot of tensions. And there was even involvement with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry about it. I would say one of the most significant events was the shooting by an Israeli embassy guard in Amman of 2 individuals, killing 2 people in Jordan. The Israelis said they acted in self-defense. The Jordanians said they were acting aggressively. And what angered King Abdullah and the Jordanians most about that incident was that Netanyahu publicly embraced the security guard, and that really caused a lot of discomfort in Amman. Also, there was a shooting at the border crossing of a Jordanian judge, and this was in 2015, 2016, and that in 2014, that also caused a lot of anger. So there were time and time incidents. I'll just give you one more. The Crown Prince wanted to visit Jerusalem to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there was the Israeli security measures prohibited him from bringing his security entourage. And from Jordan's perspective, that was a violation of the dignity of their leaders. So there were just so many incidents between the 2 leaders. Recently, King Abdullah gave an interview to the BBC where he said he didn't trust a single word that Netanyahu says. So they don't really talk in any significant way. The communication is much more through the security echelons between the Mossad and the Shin Bet on the Israeli side, and the Mukhabarat and the military on the Jordanian side. But there still is cooperation. And one example would be during the 2023-2025 Gaza war, that Iran fired 3 times missiles and drones over Jordanian airspace that were directed at the Jewish state. And Jordan not only shot them down, but it allowed U.S. troops to shoot them down. There was even an NBC report that said Jordan allowed Israeli military airplanes to shoot them down in Jordanian territory. Mm-hmm. So there does maintain strong security cooperation between the 2 sides, but between the political leadership, King Abdullah and Netanyahu, there's no love lost between them.
I mean, but it's also King Abdullah over the years has met with a long list of Israeli leaders, from President Herzog to Yair Lapid when he was foreign minister, I think twice. And then when he was even prime minister, they met together in New York. There was a secret meeting apparently between Naftali Bennett and King Abdullah. He's met with Benny Gantz when Benny Gantz served as defense minister, but he doesn't meet with Bibi. I mean, it seems almost that it's what we would say dafka. It's intentional. It's to say, I'm willing to meet with these Israeli leaders, but I'm not willing to engage with Netanyahu. Is there something deeper here on the personalities of these 2 men? That is there something about Bibi specifically that he doesn't like?
Well, first of all, King Abdullah has met with Netanyahu, and I'll give you one example. During the beginning of Netanyahu's current term, his first visit overseas was actually to Amman. So there have been some visits between the 2 leaders, but it's not frequent.
Well, I mean, first term, you mean going back to the beginning, 2009, 10?
When I say in the first year when he came back to power, and then his most recent, it was about 2 years
2022.
Ago, before the war. I think it was. Yeah, during that period, there was an initial meeting. But I would say King Abdullah just doesn't trust Netanyahu at all. He doesn't like the direction that Netanyahu is leading his country. From King Abdullah's perspective, the 2-state solution, which he calls the 57-state solution, actually, that is the path that he thinks is appropriate. And he's seen some support for the 2-state solution from certain Israeli leaders like Yair Lapid or President Herzog, as you mentioned. But from Netanyahu, there's basically none of that. So he is willing to maintain the relationship because it's in his country's national interest with the state of Israel. But personally, with Netanyahu, I don't see much hope for that relationship.
So, but okay, so let's talk about what beyond the personality. So we're not going to be able to get into people's heads here. The king has a number of serious issues. One of them is that the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan does have a very significant, if not majority, population of Palestinians inside the country. So he obviously has to pay local politics, and he can't maybe overly embrace Israel, especially, let's say now, in a time of war or during the Gaza war. Now things are a little less intense. But that must play a role. The whole situation on the Temple Mount, what was referred to as Al-Aqsa, they look at themselves as the custodian of overseeing the holy site. I mean, talk to us about some of the issues that he has politically with Israel, but also domestically, how it plays out within Jordan itself.
So the domestic factor is huge. As you cited, about 50% of Jordan's population is of Palestinian descent. So the issue of, and it's the largest population of Palestinians outside the West Bank and Gaza in the entire Middle East. So a much higher percentage than Egypt, Lebanon, UAE, Bahrain. So when some people argue that Jordan's relationship with Israel should be the same as, the UAE or Bahrain, they don't have nearly the same domestic demographics.
How many people are we talking about? Millions?
Yeah, millions. Many. I mean, 6 million Palestinians in Jordan. Now, the Jordanian government doesn't officially publicize this number because it's very sensitive, but it's around that. And it's also the history of the country. In 1970, Jordan had a civil war with the Palestinian militants, also known as Black September. Thousands of people were killed in the clashes. So the issue of Palestine is just much more important based on geography, because it borders the West Bank, based on demographics, based on emotion, religion, than a lot of other Arab countries. So it's not so simple for King Abdullah to just totally abandon it. Now, during the Gaza war, it's been a delicate balancing act. So on the one hand, Jordan, because of its domestic population and because of the outrage that many Jordanians had towards the war, it recalled its ambassador from Tel Aviv in the first month. It's told Israel's ambassador in Amman not to return until the war ended, and Israel's ambassador is still not present. It froze a water for energy deal with the UAE and Israel. And King Abdullah recently called Israel's action a genocide. So there have been certainly strong criticism, but at the same time, because of King Abdullah's relationship with the United States, he's also taken a few measures that many in his population have opposed. So, for example, he's refused to scrape the 1994 peace treaty. The $15 billion gas deal from the Obama administration has remained intact. We mentioned Jordan.
Israel supplying gas to Jordan.
Yeah, and Jordan paying for that, but
yeah.
Correct. And also, Jordan has shot down the Iranian missiles. And according to an Axios report, Jordan's security forces actually played a mediator between Israel and HTS after Assad was toppled, because Jordan had good ties with both parties. So on the one hand, it has to appease its population, which a very large number is of Palestinian background. But on the other hand, in order to continue receiving the billions of dollars of aid from Congress, it needs to maintain some sort of relationship with the Jewish state.
How stable is the kingdom right now? I mean, one of the things that I've often heard over the years from different Israeli security officials in particular is that when we look at the country, we have obviously the front with Hamas in the south, we have Hezbollah and Syria in the north, Iran off on the horizon. Egypt, now things are a bit tense. That's for another conversation. But we have a massive border with Jordan, a very, very, very long land border, and we have very minimal security forces deployed along that border because it's a quiet border. But the concern has always been that if, God forbid, King Abdullah were to fall, it would open up a direct front and a straight line, unhindered, between Iraq, Jordan, and the West Bank, and the hills overlooking Jerusalem, for that matter. So you would have potentially Iranian militias who would be coming up into the West Bank. I mean, so Israelis have always said keeping King Abdullah in office and ensuring that he remains stable, so hence the water deal, the gas deal, the security coordination, and even when he accuses Israel of genocide, let's say, Israel is relatively moderate with its own responses to Jordan. We don't hear a lot of criticism in the Israeli government of Jordan, unlike, let's say, other countries. I mean, for that matter, we don't hear it about Egypt that much as well. And Israel makes a decision, to an extent, restrain itself, because the greater interest is the peace deal, as fraught and as cold as it is. I mean, how stable are they? Do we have to be concerned? And do you agree with that assessment that it really is an Israeli security interest?
So the alternative for King Abdullah were not ruling, we saw recently in elections in Jordan, the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated party, the Islamic Action Front, won the most seats in last year's election. And if the Muslim Brotherhood were to take over Jordan, that would certainly mean no peace treaty with Israel, no gas deal, no security cooperation. So from Israel's interest, King Abdullah's leadership is 100 times better than the Muslim Brotherhood faction. And that's who is popular in Jordan right now. So I don't see when people argue, King Abdullah has criticized Israel, Queen Rania, she's attacked the Israeli military, therefore we need to reduce our ties. You have to think about what is the alternative. And the alternative in Jordan, there's not a pro-Israel wing in the country. The alternative for, if it's not King Abdullah, is going to be the Muslim Brotherhood. So in terms of whether...
It has to be said that King Abdullah has been very tough on the Muslim Brotherhood.
Very difficult on the Muslim Brotherhood. And recently they just banned the group, even though they won the elections last year, confiscated the group's assets, closed down their offices, jailed many of their members. He's even called in the past the Muslim Brotherhood wolves in sheep's clothing. So there's a lot of tensions between the two groups. But it's partially because of how popular the Muslim Brotherhood is in the country. Now, in terms of King Abdullah's stability right now, there were a lot of claims during the war that it was a quote-unquote existential threat to the kingdom, and I thought that was pretty exaggerated. People have been calling or predicting King Abdullah's downfall during the Arab Spring protests with ISIS, the Syrian refugee crisis, the Iraq War of 2003. And
right, how many Syrian refugees did they take in during the civil war in Syria?
So
about 1 million, no?
According to the UN's numbers, officially there were around 650,000. According to Jordanian government numbers, it was 1.3 million. So it's probably somewhere in between. But King Abdullah has faced a lot of tensions regionally and domestically during his reign, but he's maintained control partially because of the support he has among the Jordanian security forces. So, for example, in the Prince Hamza sedition affair, the one who told Prince Hamza that he had to remain at home under house arrest was actually the army chief. During the Gaza war, Jordan's security forces have arrested over 1,500 pro-Gaza protesters, according to Amnesty International, which shows even though there might be some individuals within the Jordanian security forces who sympathize with the protesters, who are on the side of the people of Gaza, they're still in line with King Abdullah. So in order for there to be a successful overthrow of the king, it would have to be that the security forces were to turn away from him, and there's certainly no evidence of that. And that is also partially due to King Abdullah's significant time that he spent in the security forces, in the military. He has very good relations with them. So I don't see in the short term any significant threat to King Abdullah's rule. There is no outside group that is especially powerful that could bring his downfall. I would say long term, the challenge is twofold. Number one is the economy is terrible in Jordan. The unemployment rate is over 20%, and it's been like that for many years. So it's just not a sustainable method for the Jordanian government just not to have any jobs for its people. It's not for a lack of attempt. It's just they're unable to do it. The lack of oil, there's just not a lot of high-tech environment in Jordan. So the economy is one issue. And then number two is transition from leader, from president or king to son, often in the Middle East has been a very challenging time. So in 2011, one of the reasons there were protests against Hosni Mubarak was because he was trying to transfer power to his son at that time. So when that moment is going to be, whether it's King Abdullah gets sick or whether they plan a succession.
And this is Crown Prince Hussein.
Crown Prince Hussein, who is named after King Hussein, that could be a sensitive period. But I would say,
by the way, I just saw today, as a matter of fact, when I was preparing for this podcast, that he was just a couple days ago or the other day visited Paris and was hosted at the Élysée Palace by President Macron. So he's kind of refining or sharpening those kingship credentials, if we could call it that.
Correct. So he's been in a lot of meetings with senior international officials, whether with President Trump, whether President Biden, though they've made a concerted effort in the royal court not to have a public meeting between the crown prince and an Israeli official because they don't want him, quote unquote, tainted in that way. But he even chaired a UN Security Council session in New York about a decade ago. So he's taking a more active role because they want him to have the limelight in order to prepare for that transition. But in general, those are sensitive times for monarchies when you transfer power.
So do you, I mean, you mentioned the economy, by the way, just so I think our listeners understand. The state of Israel, GDP per capita is about $55,000. In Jordan, it's about $4,600, $4,600. I mean, it's, less than 10% of the GDP per capita of what we have here in the state of Israel. It kind of just underscores a lot of the challenges that they face in Jordan. Do you attribute, though, his success in kind of really holding this all together? And he's challenged, he's got tense relations with the Saudis, and he's obviously got his issues internally in Israel, where he has this long border, and of course Iraq over there to the east. Does this have to do with his American background and those American values or skills or education that he received, do you think, to some extent?
So the book argues there are 3 to 4 factors in why he's been successful in maintaining power for so long, even as neighboring leaders, whether Saddam Hussein, Hosni Mubarak, Bashar al-Assad, so many of them have fallen. So on the one hand, I agree with you.
Benjamin Netanyahu fell but came back. No, I'm kidding.
So on the one hand, it's definitely important to note that the support he has from the United States, the billions in dollars of aid, the weaponry, the intelligence support, that is critical. Number 2, it's the support he has from the Jordanian security forces. Unlike in Syria before Bashar al-Assad fell, there's no part of Jordanian territory where the security forces don't have control over, where there's autonomous zones have Iran-backed militias or other areas that would be a serious threat. So that doesn't exist. Number 3 is he has a nuanced form of dissent. So Jordan is not a democracy. The Economist ranks countries in its democratic level. Jordan is the lowest one, authoritarian. And parliament is toothless, and the prime minister is appointed and fired by the king. But at the same time, he doesn't use Bashar al-Assad or Saddam Hussein level violence against his people. He's not bombing hospitals. He's not killing journalists. And therefore, that does decrease the opposition among the Jordanian public against him. So that would be one. And then he's had a very cautious foreign policy, especially regarding to military force. So he's not sending Jordanian forces to Iraq, to Syria, across the region, and that ensures that there's less international tensions against Jordan. And we saw that most recently with Gaza. King Abdullah said very early on, we're not sending Jordanian troops to Gaza because that would be wildly unpopular, both among the Jordanian public, but also in the Arab world. He did not want to see scenes of Jordanian troops clashing with Hamas militants in the tunnels of Gaza, whether that would be Jordanian casualties, which would be a terrible look for King Abdullah, or also Jordanian troops killing Palestinians. So he doesn't want any of that. And I think part of the reason for his success is by really focusing on Jordan and not trying to be a pan-Arab leader that has strengthened his rule. And in fact, over a decade before President Trump called for an America First foreign policy, King Abdullah actually used the term Jordan First in 2002, 2003. And why did he say that? Because there were a lot of calls during that time to expel the U.S. troops from the country, from Jordan, and before the invasion of Iraq. And King Abdullah says, no, we need to prioritize our national interests. We need to have strong relations with the United States. And at the same time, there were also calls at that time to scrape the 1994 peace treaty with Israel as the Palestinian death toll rose during the Second Intifada. King Abdullah said, no, we can't do that. We need to maintain ties with Israel as part of our relationship with the United States. So King Abdullah has prioritized internally often, and that has ensured that he's stayed in power for so long.
I want to ask you about the Gaza war, because what I find interesting is I understand, obviously, why they wouldn't send troops to Gaza. Presumably, I think the numbers are not necessarily known, but if a significant percentage of the population is Palestinian, we can assume that a percentage, at least, of the military is Palestinian as well. So it might not even, you might not be able to get the Jordanian military to actually do anything in an effective way in Gaza. But the Jordanians, didn't really even make a big effort to take Palestinians into Gaza, in from Gaza. We remember the visit in the beginning of the Trump second term now, when King Abdullah came to the White House. President Sisi, for example, from Egypt has stayed away, but King Abdullah did come, and the president was kind of urging him and saying, you got to do more. You got to take some Palestinians in. They haven't. I mean, how do you understand that? Why the reluctance to help the people of Gaza?
So the idea of Jordan taking in large numbers of Palestinians, that had no public support in Jordan. So it was based on two factors. Number one, the idea of Jordan participating in the emptying of Gaza's population from the Jordanian perspective would be widely unpopular, and therefore King Abdullah didn't want to be betraying the Palestinian cause. And number two, probably most importantly, was the demographic issue. Because Jordan is already about 50% Palestinian, he didn't want an extra million, which could increase
that
it
would
to
destabilize the country. Yeah.
Destabilize the country. And it really goes back to the 1970 civil war. The idea of Jordan accepting right now potentially Hamas militants into the Hashemite kingdom, that could lead to clashes with Jordanian security forces again. And King Abdullah didn't want to repeat what happened to his father, where thousands of people were killed during that war. So King Abdullah rejected that, but I would say he did it in a much more effective way than, for example, Ukrainian President Zelensky, who came to the White House that same month and had tensions with the president. And in that meeting, Zelensky was thrown out of the White House, and there was a huge embarrassment to Kiev. When King Abdullah left, he maintained very strong ties with the White House, and afterwards, President Trump released a video saying how amazing King Abdullah is as a leader, and the Jordanian people are lucky to have him. King Abdullah praised President Trump during that meeting as a man of peace, so he knows how to work with Americans. And then after that meeting, even though there was a worldwide freeze on aid, Reuters and Amman.net had reported months later that hundreds of millions of dollars in security assistance have continued to flow from Washington to Amman. And I would just emphasize why I still think the title the most American king is appropriate even after that incident of King Abdullah basically rejecting President Trump's proposal, is because it's not like there were other Arab leaders, whether Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, who were saying, yes, please send hundreds of thousands of Gazans to our territory and we'll appease President Trump. King Abdullah was consistent with the entire Arab world, and there was no other Arab leader who, quote unquote, outflanked him on that issue. And therefore, King Abdullah, he had the meeting and he was successful, he was diplomatic, and ensured the ties remained quite strong.
Isn't it just because he wore a suit to the meeting, unlike Zelensky, who did not wear a suit? No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to let you go, Aaron, but I have one last question for you. What would you, if the Israeli government called you into a meeting and said, you've studied King Abdullah, you've now written the biography of this man who's obviously very important to the state of Israel, and his continued reign is of great importance and strategic and security importance to Israel. What do we not understand about him? What would you recommend to Israel? What do we not understand, and what could we maybe do better?
Sure. So I think a lot of the criticism, especially during the beginning of the war against Queen Rania from various spectrums of the Israeli media, Israeli society, even some politicians, I just think that's completely unwarranted, and it's just unrealistic to expect King Abdullah and Queen Rania to be, quote unquote, like Zionists or to adopt the Israeli narrative. They have to understand the demographics of the country, which many Israelis know, but they don't really focus on enough. That with a population of about 50% Palestinians, if he wants to continue his rule, he needs to adopt certain tactics which are going to be critical of the Israeli government. And the best way that you reduce tensions, which I think, thankfully, the situation is right now, is the war has ended, and that has caused the protests in Jordan, which were tens of thousands of Jordanians on a regular basis going out and criticizing the Jordanian government for keeping the peace treaty, keeping the gas deal, keeping all these security cooperations. So I think it's critical that from the Israeli side, they have realistic expectations of what King Abdullah can actually do, because it's much better than the alternative from Israel's perspective, and the alternative would be the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, is very close to Hamas.
Okay. Aaron Magid, who wrote the book, the author of The Most American King, about Jordan's King Abdullah. I want to thank you very much for joining us. It was very, very interesting, because I think it's not something we think about enough and give enough thought to. It's kind of like this hundreds of miles long border that we have on our eastern front that we just kind of take for granted. And you have definitely explained to us very well today how we should not be taking any of this for granted. So, ladies and gentlemen, you want to get this book. It's very interesting. It gives great insight into King Abdullah himself, into his rise to power, and to how he has stabilized Jordan and continues to hold on to power there. And the future of Jordan is of great importance to the future of Israel. So definitely, as we ended with that advice to the Israeli government of what happens, his story, the King Abdullah story, is going to have great significance as we look to the future of this country. So, Aaron, let me thank you once again for being with me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. As always, you can find us where podcasts can be found on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and the website of Times of Israel. Give us a 5-star ranking. It means a lot. Share this with your friends, family, and colleagues, anyone who you think might be interested in the insight that we're trying to bring on Israel and the Jewish world. We'll be back with another episode in just a few days. In the meantime, have a great rest of your week, quiet weekend, and we'll see you soon. Shalom from Jerusalem.